All right, welcome back. These are the notes for 1-6. So we're going to talk about properties of parallelograms. We need to quickly define a couple of things. The first are consecutive angles. So there are two angles that share a side. Okay, and then remember from the last video that a parallelogram is a quadrilateral that has two pairs of parallel sides. So a slightly nicer picture looks like this. And what we're going to do is review some of the properties. So we want to list two sets of opposite angles. All right, so the opposite angles would be angle B and angle C, as well as angle A and angle D. They're literally opposite one another. This is different than the consecutive angles, which share a side. So we can say angle A is consecutive with angle C, or angle A is consecutive with angle B. We'll just leave it at that. All right, and then listing opposite sides. Again, remember that to list a side, we need to list it as a segment. So if I start with segment BD or side BD, the opposite side would be side AC. And then side AB is opposite side CD. All right. Then we can move down to talk about the 4 theorems or rules about parallelograms. So in all parallelograms, we know that opposite sides are congruent. We know that opposite angles are also congruent. We know that the diagonals of any parallelogram bisect one another. And we know that consecutive angles are supplementary. So, using these definitions, we can now find values in parallelograms. So there are 5 ways that you can show that a quadrilateral is a parallelogram. Using the definition, if both pairs of opposite sides are parallel. If we look at the first rule that we looked at, then both pairs of opposite sides are congruent. If both pairs of opposite angles are congruent. If the diagonals bisect one another. And a new rule is that if one pair of opposite sides is both parallel and congruent. So let's look through a couple of examples. For example number 1, it's hard to tell whether or not this figure is a parallelogram. We do see that one diagonal is bisected, but the other isn't. So we have to say no, because there's not enough info. For number 2, we see that we have one pair of opposite sides that is congruent and parallel. So we say, yes, this is a parallelogram based on rule number 5 above. In number 3, we have 18 and 18 and 12 and 12, which means that we have 2 pairs of opposite sides that are congruent. So we're going to say yes based on rule number 2. All right, and now we're going to actually do some algebra. Okay, so for example number 4, we are told that it's a parallelogram. In parallelograms, we know that diagonals bisect one another. So that means that this segment is congruent to that segment, and this segment is congruent to that segment. So knowing that congruency helps us to set up an equation, because we can say that 2a equals 30 and 4b minus 6 equals 34. If 2a equals 30, then we know that a equals 15. And solving the second equation, we'll add 6 to both sides and get that 4b equals 40, which means that b equals 10. All right, in example number 5, we're told it's a rhombus, remembering from our previous video that in rhombuses, all sides are congruent. So 4x is equal to 2x and 5y plus 4, and this unlabeled side. So knowing that 4x is equal to 5y plus 4 is not a helpful equation, because then we have one equation with 2 variables. But we can also use the fact that 4x is equal to 2x plus 12 and set up an equation there. So we'd subtract 2x from both sides and get that 2x equals 12 and x equals 6. So that means that each side is 24, 4 times 6, which is helpful because now we can find a new equation for y and say 5y plus 4 equals 24. Subtract the 4, 5y equals 20, y equals 4. All right, last example. We're told that it's a square, so we again know that all 4 sides are equal or congruent. Unfortunately, that doesn't help us with the 4x and the 2y if we look at the opposite sides, but we can look at the consecutive sides and again set up an equation. So we'll say 6x minus 10 equals 4x. We can subtract the 6x from both sides, so negative 10 is equal to negative 2x. X is equal to 5. Then substituting the 5 in for x, we know each side is 20, which means that 2y equals 20, which means that y equals 10. As always, let me know if you have any questions.